India's Aravindh Chithambaram is playing his second super tournament here. He played at the Chennai Grand Masters and won it, and now is here at the Prague Masters. His opponent is the local boy Nguyen Thai Dai, and Nguyen is a very strong player. He recently won the Vaikanze Challengers section, and here Arvind will have his task cut out. But Arvind is on a high in his career. He is at 2730 ELO. That's the highest rating. He's world number 22, and this will definitely be a battle to watch out for. The players shake hands and off we go. Let's see what Arvind opens the game with. He goes knight to f3, presses the clock, and maybe he's going to go for the reti with bishop g3, bishop g2 and short castles. Thai Dai writes the move down and pushes his pawn to d5. Playing the main line here. Will Arvind go into d4 territory? No, he pushes g3 here. So pawn to g3 played. And black goes g6. The idea is to develop your bishop on the long diagonal. Bishop comes to g2. And black plays his bishop to g7. For white now, it's a question whether to castle and allow e5 or to go d4 stopping e5. And Arvind stops e5, which is logical because if you castle here, then e5 and you have to play against this position. So d4, knight f6 comes out. It's 100% symmetry. White will now castle. Arvind does it. He castles his king. And I believe Thai Dai will also castle it out here. Yes, he also castles it out. So for white now, there are a few options. One is the move c3 that Kramnik actually popularized. There's also c4, which is the main move in the position, and Arvind goes for it. c4. It's like a pawn sacrifice, but once you take it, I go knight a3 and I recapture the pawn. So it's completely normal. He goes c6, which is a very solid way to play the position. Now his center is very solid, and it's also very tough to break this setup as white. Arvind brings his queen out to b3, and this is a very nice square for the queen because it puts pressure on d5, also puts pressure on b7. And queen b6 was perhaps the main move here. But now a5. And this is a sign that you are taking some risks here. Because after pawn takes pawn, which is going to be played here, if you take with the pawn, the b5 square is weakened. And so it's kind of important here to interpose the move a4, which is what Thai Dai does. He pushes the queen away. Now the queen has to go back. If you go queen c2, there's also bishop f5, which will strike the queen. So maybe queen d1 makes a lot of sense. So he plays his queen to d1. And now, of course, clearly you don't want to be taking with the knight. White would have a strong center with e4. It's playable, but much more solid is to take back with the pawn, cd5. And now Arvind brings his knight out to c3. So the point is, if you play knight e4 here, I mean, it's attacking the pawn. So logically, queen a5 makes a lot of sense, or even the move a3 may be possible. But he plays knight e4, and now the point is, can you simply not take here? So after queen a5, b3, you have the move b5, pushing the knight away, and then knight c6 followed by the c3 square getting weakened. So Arvind here plays the very interesting move knight g5. So he's opening up the two knights and the bishop against the knight. So all three are attacking the e4 knight. And now knight takes knight. And you take back with the pawn. Pawn takes c3. And white has bolstered his center here very nicely. But the c3 pawn is very weak. And at the same time, the c4 square also is kind of a bit of a weakness. So Aravindh must play carefully. Knight h3 to f4 makes a lot of sense. He does go knight h3 here. And white's position does now look interesting. We'll see how this goes. Queen c7, attacking the pawn on c3. You can go bishop a3 to attack e7. Aravindh goes bishop d2. Slightly passive move, but also at the same time believing in the strength of his position. Thai Dai is deciding what next to do. Oh, he decides to take the knight. Very interesting decision, because he could also play knight c6, but I guess after knight f4, e6, he didn't like his bishop was being blocked inside. So bishop takes h3. You part away with your problematic piece, but in return you give the bishop pair to white. And can white press here? Like, one of the simple ideas is bishop g2 and push e4. That would be a simple way to play this position, but Aravindh goes rook b1. Also a useful move, putting the rook on an open file. And Nguyen goes knight d7. So he wants to play his knight to b6 followed by knight c4. That is his plan. Plays his rook to b4. So Aravindh actually starting to put pressure down the b file. If he can go queen b1 or queen c2, rook b1, that would be nice. He goes knight to b6, trying to get the knight to the c4 square. And yeah, you don't have time, because if queen c2, there is knight c4, and if I try to double the rooks here, there is knight a3 with a fork. So very quickly Aravindh plays queen b1, and he tells Nguyen that it's not so easy for you to move your knight because b7 is hanging. So Nguyen actually plays his rook to a6. He defends the knight, but in a way white has got a bit of control here now. The rook goes to the c1 square, defending the c3 pawn. And let's see what comes up next. Knight comes out to c4. And the knight actually attacks the bishop. The point again is rook b7, knight d2, rook c7. This is good for white, because take. However, here black can go knight, queen c6, attacking here, and if you save the bishop, I go back and kind of trap your rook here. So this doesn't seem great. Aravindh goes bishop e1. A very passive move. In fact, better would have been to play bishop to f4 or rook d1 here, but instead he went bishop e1 and rook comes to b8. A classy move here by Nguyen, because he's now threatening bishop f8 to attack the rook on b4. So rook b8 played. Beautiful. This is actually a great thought here, and just opening up the bishop. Queen comes up to d3 for Aravindh, and he's definitely under a lot of pressure. Bishop f8, attacking the rook. The rook has to go back, and you will see that slowly and steadily white's bishop pair is doing nothing, while black's minor pieces look fantastic. Bishop comes up to a3, attacking the rook here on c1. And now the rook comes up to c2. Now rook b6. A beautiful move by Thai Dai 1, because after takes on b6, queen b6, there's a way to enter the position. He goes queen d1. And now knight comes to b2. Wow. With the knight sitting on b2, it's a tricky position here. What he goes queen d2, attacking the knight, threatening to take on b2. Knight comes back to c4, hitting the queen. Are we going to see a repetition here? I don't think Van Nguyen needs to take a repetition here. His position is free flowing. It's good for him. So why not continue it? So he takes, and rightly so. Rook takes b1. Queen takes on b1. And you can drop your bishop back. Oh, he first plays b5. Maybe another idea was rook a8, rook a6, rook b6, trying to enter with your rook rather than b5. Bishop comes back to f1. And the king comes up to g7. So black's position is easy to improve. He can go h5, bishop goes back. Maybe there are b4 breaks. e3 played. Aravindh may want to take the knight here, but then his remaining bishop would be pretty bad. h5 played. White goes queen d1. Well, I think all that Aravindh can do here is wait. There's nothing much more for him unless he wants to try for something active like f3, e4. That does come with its own perils. Rook comes up to b6. And Aravindh plays his queen to f3. Queen comes up. It's kind of a waiting game. Both sides have a lot of time, plenty of time on the clock. h3 by Aravindh. But it's clear that white can't do much. If there's something, then it's black who can do it. Queen goes to b7 with the idea of pushing b4, maybe at the right moment. King goes to h2 and bishop comes to d6. Well, he wants to play h4 with this pin. So Aravindh decides to come back. He could have also played h4 with white, but king g1, not bad. And Thai Dai 1 goes bishop a3 back. Aravindh plays bishop e2. Well, both sides fighting here, trying to figure out what to do. I believe both of them don't want draws here. Rook comes back. The bishop drops back to a3, attacking the rook. Rook comes up to b1, slightly more aggressively placed instead of on c2. And the bishop comes back to d6. Aravindh plays his bishop back to f1. Waiting game goes on. Now knight a3 played, attacking the rook. Must remember that we are closing in on the 40th move, and I think Thai Dai wants to get there before he pushes his any of the pawns here with f5 or f6, e5, g5, whatever it may be. Queen comes back to d1. And he goes back rook to b8. Aravindh, now with 40 moves done, gets a lot of time on the clock, plays queen d2. So he will have like 52 minutes now, while Thai Dai for him, these 30 minutes are super important. Bishop goes back. And finally h4 played, stopping the black kingside pawns from advancing. Rook comes to c8. And queen b2. Maybe someday the queen will eye the king on g7. It's incredible how one bad move just leads you to a position with absolutely no future. And here you shouldn't get tempted to take this way, because after queen c4 again b4 is there in the air and black is clearly better. So he played the move queen b1. Goes bishop a5. I think this is one of the strengths of Nguyen Thai Dai. He has immense patience. He's not in a hurry. He's ready to keep moving back and forth. Appear that he's clueless, but I think he has a plan. Knight comes back to d6. And now some serious pressure on the c3 point. Rook c2, still waiting. And he jumps back with his knight to c4. The rook comes back to c1. And Thai Dai brings his knight back to d6. And Aravindh now okay with a draw. It repeats here, rook c2. Declining the repetition, playing queen d7. And I think makes a lot of sense. King comes up to g2. And queen comes up to b7. Now, look at this. The queen is eyeing the opponent's king. Queen d1 played just so that the queen would have to go to f3. Rook c7 played, just calmly defending his queen. Maybe wanting to go to queen c8 and attacking here. Played king h2. And now queen c8. So you have 3 attackers here on the c3 pawn, while there are only 2 defenders. So how do you defend it? He goes queen c1. And the rook just moves to c6. King comes up to g2. And the queen comes up. king comes to h2. You can see how both players are moving back and forth, but none of them want a draw, especially not Nguyen Thai Dai. King g2, queen c7, and again king g2. Now the queen comes to e7, and I believe that somewhere now e5 is on his mind, but also the timing of it, because he's come down to 8 minutes on the clock. Queen b1, queen goes back to b7, and he plays queen to c1. The queen goes to c7, king g2. Queen c8, king h2. Moving ahead here, maybe the players will agree to a draw. Maybe Thai Dai will break and lash out in the center with e5 at the right moment. He goes rook c7, still waiting. But the problem of this approach is that now he has come down to 7 minutes. That's the big problem. It's not like Thai Dai has unlimited time. He would have then carefully weighed the consequences of each break. So queen comes up to a3. And the knight is attacked here on d6. He goes knight to c4. The queen comes back to c1. And now Thai Dai ready to push his pawn in the center. e5 played. Wow. After many moves, black has finally made some progress. Takes. He took with the knight, attacking the bishop. If bishop takes b5, there is check, king g2 and queen g4, after which it's a mating attack. So bishop e2, b4 played. The pawn is pinned because if you take, the rook is hanging. And queen d1, and now the queen moves to f5. Now an important move here is king g2, because after b takes c3, queen d5, queen c2, queen e5 is still possible to hold. But instead of king g2, he goes rook c1, a blunder here, a huge blunder, because now the bishop, it seems like it's defending c3, but it's not the case. Rook takes c3 played. A great move, because if bishop takes c3, there is queen f2 hanging. He has to take, otherwise he's in trouble. Queen f2 played by Thai Dai. He's completely winning now. King h3. He takes on c3. His pawn is strong on c3 square. Aravindh pins the knight, hoping for some miracle to occur. Like for example, queen takes, queen e5 would end in a draw. But queen d4, he plays bishop c7, the best move in the position. But look at Thai Dai time. He's down to 30 seconds. Take on c3. And now very important to play bishop d6. But he plays queen e2, a blunder. Because now rook c7. And there is a pin here. The knight cannot join into the attack. That's the big problem. And so even though black is completely dominating here, you can't mate with the lone queen. Check. King h2. And now how wonderful it would be to play knight g4. But it's not available. You have to go check. King comes to h3. And guys, what a game this has been. It seems like Thai Dai 1 cannot win it. Players making their moves quickly. Check. King moves up. Queen check. And King H2. You can see the sadness on Nguyen Thai Dai 1's body language. It's a draw. Players agree to a draw. Quite an unbelievable finish that was. Just to show you, after bishop c7, rook takes c3, black is winning if the move bishop d6 is played. It's a very nice move. Just keeping control, attacking the knight, attacking the bishop here. And if you save the bishop, then I just go king h7 with the idea of knight g4 and mate. If rook c8, there is queen f5 check. King g2, queen here, and check, and already this is over. So yeah, there was this chance of playing bishop d6. Also rook c6 is met with queen e2 here, and f6 unpinning. Not first queen f1 check, king h2, and now f6, and it's just a mate here. So a very big miss here by Thai Dai 1. He could have won his first game in his home city, Prague, but it was not to be. Aravindh Chithambaram hung in there, and in the end there was no chance for Thai Dai 1 to win. And so the game ends in a draw, and we are looking forward to the next games of the event.